Greetings, I am Barry Rushton and welcome to Speak Up, the television arm of Freemasonry throughout New Zealand. We have a great show for you this evening. Our special guest is an absolute genius when it comes to craftsmanship, but I will introduce you to him very shortly. Also on the program is Cameron Smith. He has been involved with 2 lodges in New Zealand that take a slightly different approach to Freemasonry. And closing the show will be our regular contributor, Graeme Houston, who will talk about a past American president who has some characteristics very similar to the current one. However, our first special guest this evening is Warren Howard. Welcome, Warren. It is great to see you. You are a master craftsman in Marquetry. Now, I know a lot of people out there will have no idea what Marquetry is. So before we get going, I'd like our viewers to see these photos. Warren, that work is absolutely stunning, and I've seen much more of it as well. Tell us, what is marquetry?
Marquetry is the decorative side of cabinet making, and it was used and pioneered a great degree by a chap by the name of Thomas Sheraton. Sheraton is the decorative style of cabinet making which is used in England in the 1800s, and I admire that man, and I have, basically speaking, copied examples of his work, and this is what you get. You get something like that, and those flowers there, for argument's sake, are beautiful for a panel, and you look at that and it's all nicely shaded. I'm going to explain to you all how I get that.
Correct.
And you don't do it in 5 minutes.
Well, see, that's the thing, Warren. I know that this program will not give us enough time for you to tell us how everything is done, but tell us, how do you do it? Not so much that, how does it start?
Well, it starts with an idea which I've conceived in my mind for a start, usually around about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I wake up and I write it down. Then I turn around and select the veneers I'm going to use. I take those veneers and I literally sandwich them together like this with paper between them, all the different colours. There's 12 different colours in that photograph you can see of those flowers. Put paper between the different coloured veneers, build it up till I've got a biscuit that thick like that. Then I turn round and put the pattern on it, and then I proceed to cut all these out. Great. Individually.
Now tell me, when you get the actual veneer yourself that you get, they're called flitches, aren't they? Is that what it's called?
Yes.
Where do they come from?
Right, flitches they come from the chaps who are in the forest. They select good timbers, burr timbers and such like. Then they're thrown into a big swimming pool and they're left there for around about 3 months, and it replaces the sap. The sap in the timber gets replaced with water. That makes it easier to cut, because if you leave the sap in, it just bluntens the knives. Then they're put onto a false flitch, and then a knife comes through and just cuts them off while they're wet, and that gives us the flitches. Now I can buy flitch, which is like this, here like that sort of thing. I buy those in 12s, 24s, right. 36, 48s.
So it's a big block of wood, say,
yes.
and it's got ready, and then it's thinly sliced like a loaf of bread, sort
Absolutely.
of sideways,
That's
and that
right.
gives you the grain all the way through.
All the
correct?
way through. It's like
Correct.
that there. You see that? You can see that beautiful grain.
I do.
Quite stunning.
And so then you get these layers, and then how do you, if you're doing a big table, what do you do then?
Well, I then mark all this out,
right.
that you see here. Then I've cut them out. Then I split them with the paper between, and the piece that I want and the colour I want to get the shading in here like that, which you can see. I actually dip that into hot silver sand. So I've got a tray like this, that deep, and in it is silicone sands. And quite frankly, I have to be very careful what I do. And if I'm going to do it by hand, before I do that, I use this tool. Now that tool's a couple of 100 years old, made by my grandfather. It's a toothing plane, and it's got little wee fine teeth on it, right through there. I go over the whole job. Then I glue size it with plaster of Paris and animal glue, hot animal glue. Then when that's dry, I smooth that off, and then I proceed to lay this veneer with this. Now this is what's commonly known as a veneer hammer, made by my great grandfather. He's got his name stamped on it, G. Howard. So I'm still using it to this day. It's a couple of 100 years old, but it works very effectively, and it's a lot of nostalgia for me. It really is.
Great. You know, when we saw some of those beautiful tables you made,
Yes.
you had this sort of, the table goes from the centre out to the end,
Yep.
and there was these beautiful patterns. Now,
Yes.
what I was saying is that's where those flitches come, right? You
Yes.
fold them together,
Yes.
and you get a pattern, and you get
Yep.
another pattern,
Yep.
pattern, and then that's put in the middle or wherever you're going
Yeah,
to
now
place
let
it,
me
right?
explain. Now, you get a flitch, and I want to make a big dining room table. So I take that flitch. You've got to assume this is the flitch like that. Well, that looks good like that, but then you put that to one side, and you do this to it, and you open it up, and you've got two pieces. Now look at that. That looks pretty good. That's the wrong side. That's the good side.
Yep.
Now, when I take this one, I do the same, take it right over. Now, you see how that's coming up?
Yeah, that's
See how
what
I
I'm
build the
talking about.
patterns up?
Yeah, great. That's
And-
what I thought.
And this is what, you can see how I can build
Yeah,
the
yeah,
pattern
yeah.
up and do it.
It's beautiful.
It's
And-
really stunning.
And on the tables also too, there's that fantastic sort of banding around the edges and how that's
Oh,
sort of
yes,
personally made.
yeah.
I know you can buy some of the small ones.
That's right.
But the ones that you have made in the past
Yep.
are just magnificent.
Yes, I have made a few of those, and that's like,
And it's a similar thing, right? You make a block and you put them all together,
Yep.
sandwich them together, and then you slice them again to get that banding around the edge, correct?
there you are there. That's showing you that. These little blocks here, I've got to make all these little blocks.
Yep.
And then I lay that down and that one down. That's a black, that's actually a black boxwood which we've dyed. That's pure boxwood. Then you got the reverse up here.
Right.
Then these little pieces here, a little wee strips, lay them on top of that, glue them all together, lay that one on top, put it in the press it down. So I finish up with a big board. If you can imagine, a metre square like that, flat board, and all you see is that black on the
Edges.
top, black on the bottom. Then I put it onto a high-speed router. Not high-speed router, my mistake. High-speed spindle moulder. And I cut them off with a spindle moulder, and that is the thickness which you can see there,
Which is beautiful.
like that. When I hold that up, you can see that, and it's not very thick, and I don't have very much to play with when I go to clean them up.
Now, you started this work, didn't you, when you were about 15 and your grandfather started, right? And he was back in about the mid-1800s, correct?
We came out here in 1855, went to Christchurch, then moved up to Blenheim. We established the first furniture factory in Blenheim. The Blenheim Club today still has furniture made by my grandfather.
We've got
I've sat on it and seen it.
We've got a photo of your grandfather's first building coming up, which is great.
Yeah.
Now, the thing is that I love is that I know that your work is so great that many pieces are around the world. I know you're not at liberty to say exactly where some of them are, but it would be fair to say that some of the royal family members have some of the pieces. I believe there's a table in the West Wing at the White House, and I know you've made pieces for many famous people.
Yeah, you're quite right there. The biggest character I know that I can remember of my client, she's quite stunning. This is Mrs. Jack Daniels Senior. She used to live here.
The Jack Daniels.
The Jack Daniels,
Very good.
yeah, she makes all that nice bourbon. Anyway, she had a big place in Parnell. Now, she was a client of a colleague of mine, David Cook Antiques, and anyway, she got me to make a lot of furniture for her. Then she decided that she's getting too old to come backwards and forwards. She went back home. Got me to double up on everything I'd made for her, then sent me a beautiful letter, thanked me very much for it, because I sold my excess furniture that paid for my trip back home. But subsequent to that, I got a phone call from a lady I'd never met, and the call goes like this: Mr. Howard, Mr. Warren Howard. Yes, this is Mrs. Fernandez speaking here. She said, I'm from Buenos Aires, and I'm a very good friend of Mrs. Jack Daniels Sr. I said, yes, how is she? Oh, she said, she's doing very fine, she's settled in, but she said, I would like to come and see you. I've flown out from Buenos Aires to come and see you to do a special commission. I said, oh, that's interesting. She said, could you meet me in at the Continental Hotel? Anyway, that's what it was those days. So I went in there, gave my card to the concierge, he knew I was coming. Here's this lady of indeterminable age. And we had a great discussion. She wanted me to design and make for her a Louis XV ladies' writing desk. Quite a challenge, I assure you. So I went home. I said, well, I'll go home and do the research on it, and I'll come up with something. Went home, did the research and such like, set to, drew it all up. The following morning I rang her up. I said, I think I'd like to take you to lunch, Mrs. Fernandez, at my home and bring you back home here because I have a full set of plans for what you have asked me to manufacture. Mr. Howard, I will be delighted. But will Madam be home? And I thought, well, that's right, something. Will Madam be home? So I quickly rang my wife and said, Judy, you've got to be home. She was in a position to do that. So I went home and she commissioned me to do this job. And she said when it was finished, to those days it was fax her and she'd come out on the next plane, which I did. It took me 9 months to make it. And I faxed her and she came out and she duly picked the piece up.
Now, Warren, you're coming up, I believe, to 60 years in Freemasonry. You joined when you were 21, is that correct?
That is right, yes. It's my 60th year this year.
What is the one enduring attribute that you think Freemasonry has given to you over these 60 years?
It's given me a set of values. Masonry has given me a set of values in which I have lived my life by. That's for the last 60 years. And I'm very proud of that. And it's also taught me how to speak up in public.
Yes. Wish we could go on longer, Warren, but it is a great pleasure to have you here this evening, mate. And your furniture, your craftsmanship is exemplary. Thank you for being here. It's been good to see you.
My pleasure, Barry. Thank you for the opportunity.
Great. And our second guest for this evening is Cameron Smith. Hello, Cameron.
Barry.
It's great to see you.
You too.
Cameron, I know that you've been involved with two of these lodges. In fact, you've been involved with three, but at the moment you're with two of these lodges of what's called the 500 series, right? Now, that's a little bit different in the traditional Masonic way. Tell me more about this 500 series lodges.
Well, Barry, the 500 series really began as an idea by Right Worshipful Brother Neil Ingram, past Deputy Grand Master. And he was concerned about standards in Freemasonry in New Zealand. And he started the first of the lodges, 500 series, which was the Lodge of the Liberal Arts, which is my mother lodge. Now, the objectives of the 500 series are really four of them. One is to promote the ideals of Freemasonry, brotherly love, freedom and tolerance. Secondly is to promote the Freemasonry in the community through education, and we'll talk a bit about where that sits with the liberal arts in a few minutes. The third was to promote excellency in Freemasonry, excellency in ritual, and more importantly, excellence in dining. Because as you know, refectory in Freemasonry
can be a bit dodgy at times.
The flying nun sandwiches, you know, and the half-cooked sausage rolls. And so he wanted to change that. And the fourth thing was, of course, to find aspiring young men who wanted to be Freemasons and fitted the ideals of Freemasonry. So that's where the 500 series originated from.
Right. There was a sort of a theme of it too, wasn't there? They sort of had more so a normal lodge would just sort of begin and it would conduct its business and so on, whereas these lodges decided, the 500 series, decided to have an overriding theme each different lodge, correct? And I believe the 500 Lodge of Liberal Arts is around art, music.
Yes, it's a very good point. The Lodge of the Liberal Arts, their theme is around music. And if you think about the Lodge of the Liberal Arts, if you go to a Lodge of the Liberal Arts meeting, sitting on the senior warden's pedestal is a bust of Brother Mozart, who was a well-known Freemason. And the Lodge of the Liberal Arts has been a long-standing supporter and contributor donor to the Auckland Youth Orchestra. And this comes back to the education theme in the community, and that is where the Lodge of the Liberal Arts has devoted their charitable work in the form of sponsoring the Auckland Youth Orchestra. Now, once a year, the Lodge promotes the Liberal Arts concert. And that's generally done these days with the Auckland Youth Orchestra because that's the prime focus of their charitable work. But we've had some magnificent concerts over the years, and I remember one in particular was all the music of John Philip Sousa, who was a well-known Freemason, and he wrote mainly military work. Some magnificent military marches, and I remember that concert in particular because of the. I'm an ex-military man. I love military music, and so it was a particularly good concert.
Now, currently, you are actually the master of the Lodge of the Liberal Arts, number 502, and I believe that also again was started by Right Worshipful Brother Neil Ingram and others. Right?
Yes, it was. Neil had a hand in the initially the inauguration of the Lodge of Enlightenment, number 502. I'm privileged to be the master right now. And the Lodge of Enlightenment, its education theme, it had the other three ideals of Freemasonry: brotherly love, tolerance, and truth, and excellence in Freemasonry, and promoting Freemasonry in the community. But its charitable work was around the literary ability of secondary school children, and they promoted for many years on the North Shore a competition for secondary school children around literary ability.
I believe it's also changing possibly its focus, and it went for a little while right into sports, I believe, and I believe there was a great charity that was run recently, right, around a sports event. Tell us more about that.
Well, I think it's fair to say that Lodge of Enlightenment is looking for a purpose in life right at the moment. Yeah. It's gone through some difficult times, and I'm encouraged with the support of the brethren to see it coming out, see some light at the end of the tunnel. Right. But earlier this year, during the Lions tour, we promoted a function at the North Harbour at the Albany Masonic Centre, where we raised $50,000 for the New Zealand Rugby Foundation. Now, the New Zealand Rugby Foundation supports injured players. Now, a lot of people actually think that the Rugby Union, New Zealand Rugby Union, with all its money, would be a major contributor, but it's not. The Rugby Foundation has to raise a significant amount of money. They have roughly 100 people who are permanently disabled in some shape or form.
Due to rugby injury?
Due to rugby injuries.
Wow. And
some of them predate ACC. So they are not the beneficiaries of the current ACC system. Now, ACC, I think, was introduced in 1973. So that tells you how long they've going.
Wow.
I think it's regrettable on the night the All Blacks lost. But we were privileged to have Brian Williams, a magnificent All Black, a great All Black.
Sir Brian now, right?
Sir Brian Williams there on the night, and it was a magnificent function. And the Rugby Foundation is extremely indebted to the Lodge of Enlightenment for the work it did in putting together that sponsorship.
Which is great. Now, I believe also there's a second charity that they are contributing to or doing things, and that's the Tabor Trust, I believe. Is that right?
That's the Mount Tabor Trust. Now, the Mount Tabor Trust is a really interesting trust. It's has a number of houses, residential units, that it runs for people with intellectual disabilities. Does a magnificent job. It's been going around for something like 35 years now. I've been out to their Helensville home to meet some of the residents in the Helensville Centre, and they do a magnificent job. Do you know that they've got people in the Helensville unit who've been there 30 years and have now married?
At the unit?
They got married at the unit.
Far out.
It's
wonderful.
It's a magnificent bit of work that they do.
Okay.
We're trying to find out ways in which we can support them to a greater extent, because as you would imagine, when you're running residential homes like that, the capital cost is huge.
Unbelievable.
And some of their facilities are getting a little bit past their use-by date, and they need to do a bit more work. So I'm working on an idea with
fantastic.
Very worshipful Brother Graeme Stretz, the Grand Superintendent of Works, to see what we might be able to do in that space.
Well, I wish you all the best with that, the teams who are behind that. Now, when it comes to sort of back to the Lodge of the Liberal Arts, that concert you talked about, they have a concert once a year. I believe it comes up towards the mid to the end of the year. I believe that the public that can go and see that concert if there are tickets available.
Yes, it'll be at the Auckland Town Hall. It'll be in October this year, and I'm absolutely certain if you approach the Secretary of the Lodge of the Liberal Arts, he will make tickets available to you. It is a worthwhile concert, and more importantly, it's a very worthwhile cause.
Well, as it gets closer to the actual date, we'll put something up on the show here where tickets can be sought from.
Good.
Now, tell me, before we finish this evening, now, you've been in Freemasonry now coming up 20 years. What made you join? Why did you join Freemasonry?
Well, it's a very good question. By way of some background, when I left school, I joined the Royal New Zealand Air Force, and I've always liked the ritual and tradition of things. Yeah. And in fact, one of my jobs in the Air Force was I taught history and tradition and what we might call ritual. And a very good friend of mine, Alan Godfrey, who's a member of the Lodge of the Liberal Arts and a member of Lodge North Harbour, he suggested I should have a look and introduce me to Freemasonry. And I'm fair to say I haven't looked back. It's been a wonderful experience for me. So what has it taught me? Well, I think it's taught me that to tolerate people better. You know,
we could all be good at that.
We could all be good at that. I think tolerance is a trait in people that's often lost. And I think that's one thing I have learned from my involvement with Freemasonry.
The busy cities of Auckland, you know, you can be intolerant, no doubt about getting from point A to point B, but you've got to calm, take a big deep breath, and learn some tolerance. I understand.
And be prepared to spend 30 minutes on the motorway.
Cameron Smith, thank you very much for being our guest this evening. It's been wonderful having you here, and all the best with the charity work that you're doing.
It's been a pleasure, Barry. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Cam. Good to see you as always. Now, we're at that part of the program which I love, and that's the part of the program where our guest presenter, Graeme Houston, is going to talk about a famous politician or a famous person in Freemasonry. Now, lately all of us know that the American presidency and the political situation in America is either seems such up in arms, and we have a president, you either love him or you hate him. But Graeme, I believe that you've got a president from the past who was a Freemason, who is very similar in actions to the current president. Is that correct?
That's correct, Barry. If we go back, it's a wonderful thing about history. History repeats. It repeats. And that's the sad thing about the lack of teaching of history today is so many people have nothing to refer to. They think it's all brand new. But if we go back to the 7th President of the United States...
That's going back.
That's going back to, you're going back to about 1829 to 1837, cool. And that is Andrew Jackson.
Yep.
Andrew Jackson... The similarities I found with the current President of the United States were these. He was someone, the first person that came along and actually challenged the political elite in Washington. He came from a background and came from the part of the population that the political elite thought should always be ruled and governed, not that they should be the rulers. He came from a background which said the Congress and the Senate had too much control and the weakening of the presidency and of the executive. And he wanted to restore that balance. He wanted to restore the people to be the deciders of who they would be governed by, not a political elite, and not an aristocracy that he thought showed signs of starting to emerge. So he became known as the common man's president.
Fantastic.
He was the president of the common man.
And I think that's probably why he would have loved Freemasonry.
I think that was right. He was an army man. He had fought in a couple of he fought in the Revolutionary War and the Battle of New Orleans. He was the hero of New Orleans, a saviour against the Britain. And what made that battle even that much better was the British troops that he defeated there were the ones that actually had defeated Napoleon earlier on. So he became the hero there. So he immediately was the hero of the people and had that common touch. Now, he is the first president, and I think might still be the only president that was given an honorific, and he was called Old Hickory. Wow. And so he was called Old Hickory because during the Revolutionary War, his toughness of attitude and his toughness of fighting led many of his troops to say he was tougher than Old Hickory wood.
Yeah.
And so
Solid
Old Hickory,
whatever, bang.
So Old Hickory became the name by which he was known. He was also the first president to be or survive an assassination attempt. And not only did he survive it, he fought with the guy that actually did that. And yes, and they had quite a tussle on the ground. And only a misfiring of a pistol from the assailant saved him from that as well.
Wow.
So he went into the presidency being very much opposed to a federal bank. He thought that that was the government getting too much control. And the ironic thing about that is today there is a federal bank in America, and the face on one of the most commonly used banknotes in circulation is the face of Andrew Jackson, and he's on the $20 bill. I find that a little bit ironic. He was...
but there's a good reason for that, right? Because again, didn't he, with regards to the debt of the country,
he was the first president to reduce and pay off the debt of the United States, and they had it zero. They didn't have anything, but they didn't owe any money either. And now today, have a look where we are. So it's deteriorated greatly since then. He was strongly in favour of the Union of the United States. He did not want a separation into the North and South. And he said then that he felt that the liberty would be lost should there ever be a separation. There are some groups, I don't say the majority of people, but there are some groups around today that see Andrew Jackson as a bigot. Sound familiar with the new president? They see him as a racist. Does that sound familiar with this president?
Because he had slaves, didn't he?
Well, he didn't have
right?
slaves, but what he did do is he signed the Indian Removal Act in 1830. That act came into being, which removed the Indians from their ancestral homes over to what they generated and created, being the Indian territories. And for that today, he's looked. But that's the problem and the failure with failing to understand history and look at it in its perspective. People judge today on today's values what they think 200 years ago. Hindsight is a wonderful thing.
Wonderful thing.
Predicting the future is slightly more difficult, and the difficulty for Andrew Jackson to predict 200 years onwards was something a little bit difficult.
Did you find out what lodge he joined? Can you remember that?
There is some difficulty. It was said that he belonged to Lodge St. Tammany, number 9, back in Carolina. But that lodge lost its charter in 1808, and a lot of the records disappeared at that particular time. But there are records and lodge records at different lodges showing that he was present at those lodge meetings. So he did all his degrees in the blue, and he became a very active Royal Arch Freemason as well. He was a Grand Master in Florida, and became very active in pursuing many of the lodge ideals. And I just think that one of the attractions for Andrew Jackson was the principles and tenets of Freemasonry as it applied to the
Individual
ordinary
people,
man, the average thinking man. And when he went to lodge, he was mixing with the average thinking man.
As we do today.
As we do today.
A brain surgeon and a dustman can be side by side and enjoy each other's company. That is one of the strengths of the whole thing, for sure.
You're right there, Barry. And it didn't sit well with him when he saw a group of people who perhaps saw themselves as a little bit different, and their place in life was to rule.
Yeah, exactly. So supposedly a bit superior.
A bit superior. And I think so the common touch, and that's one good thing about Freemasonry, it maintains and it keeps the common touch. And it's the common touch that I think that really appeals to a lot of people.
That we love. A great choice, Graeme. A great choice, my friend.
Thank you very much, Barry. We'll see you next week. We'll have another one.
Thank you, Graeme. Well, that's our show for this week. Thank you for watching. We'll be here this time next week, same channel. So I'm Barry Rushton for Speak Up. See you next week.